Start broadcast. Okay. All right, we are live. Let me go ahead and switch over to the window. If it'll let me. Why won't you let me? There we go. All right. Okay.
Right, we good to,
yep, we're good to start. Yep.
Okay. Alrighty. Thanks for giving me some time to properly show this off. Like I said, I'll go through everything, and then we can talk about it at the end after the Q&A section. See that? So the objective of this is fairly simple, at least in concept, right? We want to implement a revised rank and progression system and staff structure and economy model designed to automate progression, which incentivizes gameplay and also has long-term balance figured into it. So starting with the simplest stuff, the staff rank structure, this would be separating staff from the existing ranks. So they would be their own groups, which would add on to the player's existing ranks. So this is simply specialist, content creator, admin, and owner. The admin and owner is pretty self-explanatory, but the specialist is basically just something that would be given to your active player who's on the server a lot, is someone who knows the plugin well and can help people out. And then the content creator, that's pretty self-explanatory as well. That person would help generate content for the server, public outreach, and so forth.
Okay.
The player rank structure would follow the U.S. Navy World War II era ranks for the most part. New players would begin at Seaman Recruit and then would be able to progress all the way up to a Fleet Admiral. So you'll see it on the next slide. But there's a few ranks that are condensed a little bit, giving us 20 total ranks. So player ranks dictate daily login money amounts. So that's basically a daily pay grade based on the rank. So every 24-hour period, they'd be able to get that pay. Players would increase rank by obtaining tonnage points. So in old NBZ, this was rank points, right? But tonnage points is exactly that. It's tonnage. As you rank up, you would be awarded with more plots and the ability to command heavier and heavier ship classes outside of Ocean 1, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So continuing on the rank structure, this is the actual setup. So starting with the ranks column, the two spots where I mainly made some shrinks, I guess, is for petty officer. Normally there's 3 different classes of petty officer. That's condensed down to 1. And then the chief warrant officer, normally there's 5 chief warrant officer ranks, and that's just condensed down to 1. You got the in-game abbreviation, which pretty much just follows. Oh, one thing about the ranks is that Commodore is also included right next to Rear Admiral Lower. That's a little bit of a historical inaccuracy, but it's there because at least during World War II it was there. It allows to have another rank to progress through. Anyway, the in-game abbreviation, that's just what would show up next to your name in chat pretty much. That's the shorthand. The login wage, that's that daily pay grade. And where this comes from is this is based off of average ship cost per class that rank unlocks. With the overarching idea that at that rank, say, Seaman Apprentice, right? You unlock PT and Light Merchant. The idea with that is that the average cost of, say, a PT boat is going to be a little bit under 500,000. So you'd be able to sail that like at least once per day if you were sailing all the time. And the rationale for that will be explained more as we go on. But as you can see, that increases up to 2 million, which is not really that big of a spread, especially considering that some of the classes that one would unlock run at an average cost of 15 to 20 million when we're talking about battle cruisers and battleships, which would require you to save up a considerable amount of money.
That's good for
These
balance.
are,
We like that.
these are placeholders, right? These were not arbitrarily decided, but they're placeholders. The tonnage requirement, this is kind of interesting. This is also based off of the average tonnage of a lot of the vessels. The governing assumption is that based on because destroyers are probably going to be one of the most common classes, at least as far as the vessels that I sampled, they were predominantly destroyers, because they work well with the plugin. They're fairly easy to crew, but that's beside the point. The metric was how long would it, or how much tonnage would be required to sink. I think it was 500 of them to get to Fleet Admiral, and so that's what governed the top number. And then 200 was the starting point because we wanted your first rank to be achievable basically by sinking like one ship, right? And then the rest filled in from there. However, there's kind of a key difference between how this compares to the old NBZ rank structure way back in the day, and that is that as you go up till about Lieutenant Commander, you're doubling every time. But then when you hit Lieutenant Commander, instead of doubling again, it's 180,000 tons all the way up to Fleet Admiral for each rank. And the idea is that would help you not just hit a wall at some point, right? You'd actually be able to progress up to the top with significant investment. Next is, of course, the plots rewarded. That's pretty self-explanatory. Again, those numbers are pretty arbitrary, but we just kind of wanted to incentivize, hey, you get extra when you make it to officer, you get even more when you make it to admiral, right? And of course, you'd probably be able to get plots by donating and stuff like that, but that's not covered in this proposal. And then the class unlocks. This ties into the class restrictions, which I'll talk about soon. But this basically is all of the existing classes that we have with a few changes made to them, or a few classes redesignated. So, but most of them are by and large the same. The only ones that were really redesignated were the merchants. So instead of a coastal merch, it's a light merch. Instead of a merchant, it's a medium merchant. Instead of a tanker, it's a heavy merchant. Right? Keeps things pretty simple. And then moving on. So how is that going to interact with the world? So to my knowledge, Dooley, yourself, and Keo, and I think Max talked about this keypad system several months ago as a concept. And so building off of that, it would consist of 9 separate worlds, virtually arranged next to each other in a keypad-like arrangement, giving us like the diagram you see on the right there. So ships would be intended to be somewhat persistent investments. Ships spawn for free in Ocean 1, so that's where your spawn island would be, with no class restrictions, no damage, but no rewards. Entering Ocean 2 or Ocean 4, i.e. sailing north or sailing east, into any of the main like combat worlds would trigger those restrictions, and would also you'd also have to pay for the ship as well. So all oceans except for Ocean 1 have damage enabled and economic rank rewards enabled. Players may engage in PvP or PvE with AI difficulty increasing in oceans farther from Ocean 1. So as you go towards Ocean 9, the ships that would spawn in that you'd be able to fight would get more and more difficult. And this is where the class restrictions come in. So an important note here is that this would only apply to the main combat worlds. So Ocean 1 would not be under the scrutiny of these, and you could do anything you want in Ocean 1. Effectively, that would take the role of what is Sea Trials right now. And being, am I correct, Garrett? 30K by 30K for that?
For the maps, no, the maps are 10K by 10K, but
Okay.
virtually the entire world, if you will, would it's a
Oh,
3
right,
by
right.
3 grid. So then we're looking at 30K by 30K.
But anyway, as far as for each section being 10K by 10K, it's still more than enough room to test even large vessels. And so I know that these class restrictions are probably or have been from the people that I've talked to while trying to develop them, have been the biggest point of contention. Um, the motivation for all of these is balance and trying to maintain some degree of scarcity for some of the larger vessels for the sake of server performance. And so there's a lot of factors baked into this. Um, and this alone is worth its own separate discussion. But like I've told you before, I'm happy to explain where any of these numbers come from or any of their justifications. Some of them are based on the averages of the ships that I collected, so my samples. Um, some of them are based. Some of them have some historical significance. A lot of the armor stuff is mainly based on balance and gun size that the classes around it are able to have. Um, the length dimension is mainly there to try and keep people from building, meme ships that are intentionally what's the word I'm looking for? Like intentionally abuse some
creep.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like what we had in
Um,
Naval Battle Zone, where people would find loopholes in the plot dimensions to try to abuse that
exactly.
for
Yep.
whatever reason.
So here's the actual meat and potatoes of how these two things will work together. So tonnage is awarded when a player either one um, returns to Ocean One, so they sail back from any of the other areas back to the spawn, right? Or the ship gets sunk. They sink it on their own, or they get sunk by enemy action, or a ship is scuttled, or if they choose to deactivate their ship, say they sail it to some island, deactivate it, that would be considered the same as sinking it in terms of how tonnage is awarded. And the next slide will explain that. Money is earned by the daily login and then sinking ships outside of Ocean One. So, how does this exactly work? Tonnage and cost awarded to captains and crew members is different based off of the characteristics of the ship sunk. Um, this sounds a little bit more complicated than it actually is. But the tonnage worth of the enemy ship sunk dictates how many tonnage points are awarded, right, to a ship's service record, we'll call it. And that's a 1-to-1 relationship. So the tonnage you sink is the tonnage that is added to your ledger, so to speak. And the reason I say that it doesn't get added immediately, we'll get into that. So tonnage points are converted to rank points upon the end of a player's play session. So either they return to Ocean One, or they sink, disable, or scuttle. Captains would receive more rank points compared to the amount awarded to individual crew members. Um, and then in terms of money, class of the sunken ship dictates a standard rate of how much money is awarded to a crew. So, for sinking a PT boat, you'd get a fixed amount of money. For sinking a cruiser, you'd get a bigger fixed amount of money. Money is awarded immediately to the player's balance upon the enemy's ship sinking. So this would not require them to sail back or sink their ship to cash in on that reward. Captains receive a little bit more money compared to the individual crew members, similar to how rank does. This is probably one of the most important questions of this. So, well, let me make a few clarifications here. Um, so, uh, Actually, we'll just go through the Q&A. So what would happen to the current players? What would happen to their tonnage that they've done? So the currently tracked PvP tonnage, not the total tonnage, but the PvP only tonnage, would be transferred, and the player would be given the rank associated with their value as their starting point. This rewards some of our longtime players that have been particularly active and have played a while and sunk a lot of stuff. It also helps safeguard against some of the people that just farmed Marus and stuff like that, AI Marus, because from what I would see, their total tonnage would drastically outpace their PvP tonnage. So I addressed this earlier, but what would be happening to sea trials? Ocean One would be replacing the role of sea trials. So players would be able to test whatever ships they'd want there, regardless of their rank or their money, or even if the ship is within within the class restrictions. Of course, if the player tries to sail outside of that, then the ship would just be despawned. The same would also happen like if they didn't have enough money to sail it out too, they would get despawned as well. how would AI ships work? So AI ships would be spawned when the player enters the other world. That way we don't have AI just roaming around, loading down a server where no one's actually in it. AI would include everything from warships to submarines, including merchants. And the types of AI that would spawn would be directly correlated to which grid ocean you're in. So the further away you get, the more difficult they'd be. And then they would also despawn after a certain amount of time without a player being present in that world. So then that would help alleviate some of the server load when it's not being used. So how many tonnage or rank points do I get credited after my play session? So keep in mind, this is if the ship is sunk, scuttled, or if you return to Ocean 1. So if your ship is sunk in any place other than Ocean 1 and you're the captain, you would receive 50% of the total tonnage you've accumulated, right? If you're a crew member, you would receive 25% of that total tonnage of your ship sunk. Now, if the ship returns to Ocean 1 and concludes their play session by doing a command, / mission accomplished or something like that, both the captain and crew would receive 2x the tonnage point rewards, i.e. they would actually get 100%. This rewards the captain with 100% and the crew members with 50%. And of course, that 50% for the crew would surely be subject to change during the play session. So what are the ways to get money in game? This was addressed a little bit earlier, but the easiest way to get money in game would be your daily bonus. That would be your guaranteed income. This amount is determined by your rank, like I said, and you can obtain money through your play session by sinking ships of different classes. I already talked about this a little bit. So what happens if you have multiple ships working together to sink a ship? Well, we already track who does damage to what and what their percent contributions are. So for any percent contribution less than 10% towards sinking of another ship would be rounded to 0. So it wouldn't be considered a contribution at all. And that would apply to however many people, were there to attack that ship, right? And so, that split could work a ton of different ways depending on how many there are. And there's an example there that goes into it, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory. So what happens if you disable your ship at sea? Could you reuse it? Yes, you can. So it would credit them their rank points and money as if the ship had sunk, because and the reason for this is to avoid some sort of cloud system that saves the ship out that would then reload it back in. That's mainly to avoid, two reasons. One is I think that there's a very good case to make for that being abused.
I mean,
Two,
all of it. Yeah, no, I totally understand. You don't even need to explain this to me. I mean, it's a good thing to explain to anybody else, but I'm 100% with you on this.
And it's just to alleviate pressure off of Max too. That's another big reason for it. But yeah, when you'd reactivate it, it would be treated as a new ship. But you had already paid for it. So because you're outside of the Ocean 1, you wouldn't have to repay for it. You wouldn't have to pay for it. So another point of interest, are factions part of this? And the short answer is this proposal, no. But they lay the groundwork for whatever is decided on in the future. So we know that they're very highly demanded, and that we'd all like to see them in some form. However, this proposal aims to make a system that is not dependent on that, that can then be added on top of. So, like I said, there's no limitations put in place to prevent players from building bases in the ocean worlds at this time, but there'd be no official standing. This assumes that factions just say don't exist for the sake of simplicity, but that there would be no official factions or protections given to bases. So I said, yeah, well, current, this is not permanent, subject to change based on what we decided, because at least I felt that with how much debate there was around that and how many ideas people have, that's worth its own separate proposal, honestly. So that pretty much covers a lot of the function of it. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, actually, I wrote a couple here down. So in terms of the ship material restrictions, Do you have any um sort of plan for hard coding them? Because my worry is that without a proper moderation team that's like online pretty much constantly, we won't be able to, go through the shipyard and say, oh nope, that ship's against the class restrictions for that class.
I can answer this one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Max has actually gotten back to me saying, let's see. He's already working on. He actually says here. So this is the last message, or one of the last messages I've got from him. He said, but I did get a bunch of stuff done just now, implementing the rank and money restrictions. I got most of the class restrictions put in. Just have to make them functional in game. I'm planning on making it just give you a warning if you scan it in Shipyard and it's not in spec for the class you have. And same if you launch it in North Seas or whatever we end up calling this world.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Perfect.
It is going to be hard-coded. It is going to be something that players will be aware of if they are out of restriction.
So
this is something that can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is, like I said, totally subject to change because some of these things are like scientific guesses, if you will, based on some bits of information. Like, I think that we would only be able to really finalize this after playing with it for a little bit.
Right.
There's not really a way to say, hey, this is verbatim the right answer.
Yeah.
We just don't know for sure. And the thing is that a lot of these are based off of what most people are building.
Yeah.
There have been a few key concessions though, or a few points of contention, I should say, predominantly around monitors because they're fairly passionate about those.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off game, right? So
and that actually brings us to my second question. I noticed that you have a sample size of 3, and I brought this up with Dooley for the monitors. And I think maybe it would be a good idea to, if not increase the sample size with more monitors, which is hard because they're pretty limited in terms of real world specs that you can build from. But maybe if you, like a battle cruiser, like an old one, maybe a pre-dreadnought that would fit sort of in the monitor range, use that as like a small cruiser or something along those lines that you can add more to the sample size would help alleviate some of the stress on people where they'll see three monitors and there's like 20 ship sample size for the destroyers. What the hell, So I think maybe, I don't know.
Well, and so I can explain that a little bit. So that 8,000 that you see there used to be, I believe it was 5,500.
Yeah.
That's the average of the sample size that I took.
Yeah, Dooley made me aware of that.
After talking to Mew extensively about it, we went back and forth on some different ideas of how to balance a higher tonnage for that class. And so I bumped it up to 8,000, which is significantly above the average. And that was to accommodate some of the stuff that he had showed me, some of his stuff, and then I think Say No More had a couple of monitors as well that factored into that. But 8,000 was, from what I could tell, an upper bound.
Yeah.
A lot of them were, of course, below that. And so all of these are padded a little bit from the averages in order to give people some room. Well, as you get higher up in tonnage, they get more and more padded, essentially.
Right.
For example, the battleships, they're in the 30,000 ton range.
Right.
But for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really make sense to regulate that.
Yeah, because they're going to be so few and far between anyway. They're so expensive and exorbitant that they're not going to be used in let's say the capacity that even a cruiser would be. And I also you can say the same thing for the cruise liner, because a cruise liner could be anywhere from the size of the Queen Mary to the size of a Titanic or beyond. I mean, it could be the size of like a modern ocean line, like cruise ship. So it's
Mhm.
yeah, I get that. And then I guess my next question would be I I understand as like a draft condensing the rank systems, but I feel like in terms of like a long term goal, we should have more rather than fewer,
Okay.
because people are going to want to progress farther. People are not going to be. I feel like we're going to have a drop off in terms of activity when someone hits Fleet Admiral and there's no more progression. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I talked to I bounced some ideas off of Max because um, when I gave him because he asked me, he was like, hey, what do you have? What are your class restrictions kind of right now? Because he was working on that and he wanted to hear from me about it. So I gave him that stuff, and so he came back to me with a list of questions and stuff. And one of the things was that he asked about was the ranks because a lot of this stuff, virtually all of it, already exists. The groups already exist for it.
Right.
It's just how those groups are used. And so, for example, we have PO1, PO2, PO3 um, by default. And by condensing it, we would actually be ignoring a little bit of code that would already be, um, we'd be ignoring something that's already implemented.
Okay.
So
Jumping around.
that would be really easy to add.
And
And then the other, so that would you'd pick up 2 ranks there, and
right.
then if you added chief warrant officer, you'd pick up 4 more ranks there. Um, so
And I guess again, this is kind of it'll be figured out in terms of how the gameplay progresses and how many people like end up getting to Fleet Admiral in, let's say, the next like 2 years. And if they say, "Hey, we want more ranks," then sure, we could do a
yeah,
reset, and then people can continue that way.
I
yeah.
think
Well,
the only
and also
issue. Oop,
go for
sorry,
it.
go ahead. Okay, I think the only issue with those ranks is those are lower ranks. You can see
Right.
with how things are scaled that even if we have those, it's not going to take too long for them to get through them. I think if you're trying to fight that ability for or fight that problem of our very experienced players leaving, the ones who have already who could do, they could get 100,000 tonnage in a week. I think that is when you start to maybe tie in other incentives that aren't rank,
Okay.
like achievements or accommodations, because unless we start making up some ranks that are at the higher end, the higher scale, I don't see it really slowing people down.
And that's a good point. And I would also just say that it seems like the people that are that invested probably won't leave anyway. So
Yeah,
so I think I think that's probably not a huge concern, but I just wanted to bring that up because I thought maybe that would be something to think about in the long term. Like if
and we
for some reason new players get really invested and they want to have more
Maybe we
progression.
even have like a prestige system where a player can choose to reset their rank and keep their plots.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's a good
that's
idea.
an idea
That's a
because
good idea.
there's no removing plots thing, but if somebody really loves building, it's a way for them to get over, nearly 150 plots at the end of the day, versus just the standard 73.
Yeah.
and another thing I was going to point out too is that the tonnage requirement scale is something that could be pretty easily changed. Um, it was kind of difficult to decide what an upper bound for that was. Um, and so, it was kind of like a hey, what is like 500 average destroyers worth? Considering that it would probably take you a while to sink 500, but um, the more that I've seen, you know, as more players get to higher ranks, it's kind of understandable that more. How do I describe this? Um, that there's going to be more large ships to sink, and so people will start promoting through the upper ranks faster because there's more targets. Um, but that's pretty far off speculation. Um,
Yeah, we'll have to really, honestly, we'll have to, I think, watch, just see how quickly people are growing, and if we're seeing people maybe grow at a rate that is too fast for what we'd like to see, we should adjust it early on,
Yeah.
rather than later.
yeah,
Do it quickly and move swiftly on it, but I think we just put kind of every player that plays under a microscope for the first week or so, and we can get a speculative like rate of growth.
and I've
Good
polled a
idea.
couple people too, um, that are fairly active, but that don't hold a staff rank, just to kind of see. Um, I'll just ask them like, "Hey, how much tonnage do you have?" Out of curiosity, just to see where they slot in to this metric, And most of the people that I've asked that, um, they slot in pretty reasonably, Like there might be a few officers, and they're mainly around the lower officer area, the kind of rank 10, rank 12 area, where they tend to slot in, which I think would be totally reasonable for
It's a good thing to have experienced players
existing players. Yeah. Because
Um,
we are, yeah.
sorry, continue. I want you to finish up your point before I get
Um,
to this because this is something completely different.
I do think that there is some value in getting some people in there at higher ranks that can take out bigger ships to see how they work with the class system and against the AIs and all that sort of stuff. Um, for the sake of kind of ironing details out. Um,
Right.
so that's just something that would be good to keep in mind.
And then I guess my next question would be, and this is kind of a dumb question in terms of like functionality, but and I'm assuming that this is the case, but are the players' PvP tonnages currently being tracked separately from their AI tonnage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Cool. And then I guess my
Those
last.
numbers already exist.
I
Good.
think it's slash who is it? Who is or NC info?
NC
It's probably
stats.
going to be a Navy
NC
Craft
stat.
command.
NC stats. Yep.
Okay.
You can see it.
And then the last question I had is, or more of a comment. My worry about making the world open for building instead of having like a separate world where people can do that is just griefing, right? We don't have a system in place where we can easily just rebuild the world to a state that isn't completely rebuilding it. You know what I mean? Like, we can take a backup of it before people start playing on it so that we can replace it in case of a massive griefing attack. But if someone does something like, build a bunch of penises that are like 150 blocks tall all over the map, we're not going to be able to go in and remove all of them really easily. That's kind of my that's it's also kind of a stupid thing, but I feel like if we're going to be prioritizing the gameplay of ships killing ships, we should separate that completely from players being on land. And I think that's something that Max has also kind of weighed in on, I'm sure, but that's just my feeling about it. I don't know how you guys feel about it, and I know that it's hard because that's what players want. They want to be able to have that mix. But I think if we're going to be prioritizing ship gameplay, that maybe we should be thinking of those two things separately and maybe having like another world where players can have their faction or whatever, or even beyond that, just to have their place where they can build stuff and also sail their ships alongside that.
So there's a couple cool things at play with that idea. I mean, so what's nice with it being a key-padded system is we can change out worlds with whatever we want. If we want a world that is mostly a continent that doesn't have much sailing room for, we could do something like that is more base-oriented. On the other hand, I don't really see players doing that type of behavior in factions currently. We're not incentivizing people to build bases, so to be honest, I don't think they will. But that's not to say they can't. But I think that
I'll counter.
we have like
I can counter that because I personally and the group of players that I play with, we did that. We did that very thing because we wanted to, and because Sea Trials allowed us to do that, we did it. So I think that it's completely out of the question that people won't do that. I think that they will. But you have a good point there that we can just switch out worlds. That's a reasonable point.
And then to add though to what I was saying though is if I think players want to build a base, they can. I know that we've talked about. I mean, here's the thing: the only way to get to these far reaches is going to be to sail. And I think that if we can balance the AI right to where, because I know the way that Max has AI set up in the code is that for however long you are in a world and there's a ship in for it, if there's no interaction or if there's it's like over a certain amount of time, it'll spawn more and more AI into the world for the longer time that you occupy this world with an active ship. So I think that if anything, what could happen is before, I think players who want to raid a base are going to maybe have their hands full with the AI.
Okay, that's fair.
I don't know if they're going to. It's not going to be an empty world, I guess.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. So they might have better priorities than to grief.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't see us having that toxic player base, fortunately, that a traditional like faction server would, where you log in one day and your base is just a crater in the earth.
Can I add some?
But yeah, sure.
To address your point of, like essentially griefing stuff that is not in line with like, building a base for the sake of like naval combat or whatever, your dick example. Like to some degree, um, at least for now, it would, you know, enforcing that would probably fall onto some of the staff just to go around and check for things like that, because we're not going to have so much landmass that's impossible to do.
Okay.
So because I mean it's mostly ocean, right?
Right.
The islands are kind of there as obstacles, if you will.
Right.
And so, that's something that could be put into the rules the same way as like, hey, we don't want you building swastikas on your ship, right? Just whatever you want to call it, nothing obscene or something like that. But it would be enforced just like any other rule. But like Garrett said, I don't think it's a valid concern. I think, but I think the likelihood is very low.
Yeah.
It's low enough to where we could police that.
Okay.
Just as people without having to like put regions around stuff, things like that. Because I too like the idea of like, maybe building a base or something like that. I always have. And I want players to be able to do that however they want to do it. That's one thing that I'm aiming for here is make a environment that you can play how you want to play it. In a lot of ways, wherever you want to sail, you can sail there. And there'll be action for you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm reminded of a conversation with Max and I not too long ago. So Max is having me go through, for one, regarding the resource pack changes, but for other things, we have a lot of existing blocks that do not have an armor value associated with them. So Max is going to try to make it to where not only do these armor values register for an active ship, but they also register for land too. So we can make blocks of a certain material armored from guns and stuff, regardless to if it is on a ship or not. It could be on a land entity, on a base. So it doesn't have to be on a moving ship.
Like make a fort that's
I'm pretty sure that already exists to some extent because I've done some testing while we were building our base, and cobblestone, which has some of the highest current armor value, does not get destroyed well by gunfire from an active ship, even if it's just part of the terrain. It takes a lot to break a single block. It's like 16-inch, I think, is what takes the most damage.
It's class 2.5. I believe it's the same as Obsidian, so it's very strong. But we've also mentioned though that regions. So making protective regions probably is the way to go because they're just a pain to create. A staff member has to do it. Also, it could change. So the best way that I think Max and I had a conversation about a long time ago would be to somehow Max might be able to code into where the AI will actually, like if you have a faction claim in a land, where the AI in that territory will actually defend it for you. So where they can patrol around and go after threats that are not associated with your faction. Again, this is all speculative talk, and I think this goes back to kind of what Casey is saying, where it's just not like a priority, but the idea is open to that you could have AI defend your base for you while you're offline.
Yeah, we had talked about some of that really early on.
And I like that. Saying this is Sorry, go for it.
No, I'm just agreeing because we did have some of these conversations early on in the talk of implementing factions.
But
Yeah,
again, you can see how in depth our conversation's getting, and this is again why.
Yeah,
why
it's too
Casey's
speculative.
Right. I think this is what
Yeah.
Casey's going to say, that it's just not worth our time to discuss right now.
Not now.
Without all this stuff getting implemented first,
There's no
the
basis
factions
for
cannot
anything
happen, right? The
else.
factions cannot
Yeah.
happen.
And so I would propose this for the sake of this implementation until a better faction slash merchant slash protection thing, right? Because there's a lot that goes into that. Until a better system could be figured out, you know, and properly implemented with some of the considerations that we all know need to be made. It probably makes sense to say for now, okay, yeah, you can go build whatever you want, wherever you want. It just won't have any official standing. And here's a few ground rules like don't build a big penis in the sky.
Okay. Yeah.
And then periodically the people that like ocean clean and stuff, for example, because that's something we'll have to do. That can also be part of their job is to say, hey, go look around the islands, make sure there's nothing hinky,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
Do you have any other questions about like the
No.
more of the gameplay side of
No, no.
And one thing about this that I will come forward about after just hearing what people have had to say. Any changes that get made to this in the future, I will immediately update the group because I've been talking to a lot of people while I've been making this, but it's not all been at one time. And so like Yacht, I apologize that I sent you some screenshots when I was first starting to put this together, and then all of a sudden this big thing just like,
it's okay.
All this stuff.
It's okay. I myself have been feeling a little bit guilty because I haven't been completely involved as much as I should be.
Yeah.
All right, Q.
But you could probably stop the recording at this point if you
Yeah. Is there anything else that I need to be aware of? Or
I'm trying to think of any pertinent gameplay stuff. One thing I didn't mention, and this I guess kind of goes without saying, is that all existing player plots would just transfer over. Like no one's going to get penalized because their rank might go down. Because there will be some people where there will be some people where their rank drops just because they haven't sunk that much.
Right.
I guess another clarification too is that the staff rank structure is completely separate. So an admin will also have a regular rank as well. Like admin will still precede that. Like people will still see that they're an admin, but they will also be able to earn and play the game same as everyone else. So they'll have a rank associated with that.
Yeah, we had. Go ahead.
One concern that I can see I can see coming up with that is, well, okay, how do you prevent players from abusing that? Max already has that implemented. You've probably noticed it if you ever switch to creative when you are playing on a ship in ST or something like that.
Yeah.
It marks it dirty. And so,
you won't receive any ranking experience or money for tonnage sunk.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And that is actually an avenue that we could use to facilitate testing on the part of the staff. If we want to test, say, a heavy cruiser or something like that, if we were in NC admin, we might be able to sail our ship into the combat world without paying for it. We wouldn't earn any rank from it, but we could do it for, testing or something like that. But that's just an idea.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just before we go on, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here, and I will go ahead and paste a link into the stakeholders channel so that everybody there can watch it and be informed of what all went on during the meeting.
Awesome.